Ashes of yesterday, the first fire was almost an accident. Ethan didn't plan it, at least not the way one plans a trip or a birthday surprise. But when the flames licked the walls of the old Miller house, when the black smoke twisted into the night sky, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: relief or freedom. That was when he knew fire could do what words never could. It erased people, the boy before the flames. Ethan grew up on Willow Street, in a peeling yellow house where the wind whistled through cracked windows. His father, Thomas, was a man whose voice was always too loud and whose fists were always too quick. His mother had a habit of disappearing into her room for hours, leaving Ethan to fend for himself. But the real cruelty came from outside. At age 8, he learned the sting of humiliation from Mr. Miller, the neighbor who caught Ethan stealing apples from his tree and dragged him by the ear through the street, shouting to everyone how thieves start young. The kids at school laughed about it for weeks. At 10, he was cornered in the schoolyard by Jack and Peter Russ, brothers with cruel smiles. They made him kneel in the mud and bark like a dog while other children jeered. The teachers never saw or didn't care. At 12, things got darker. Mrs. Caldwell, his math teacher, hated unmotivated boys. She made Ethan read out his failing grades in front of the class. She smirked while the other students whispered and snickered. Every F was a brand seared into his pride. Each of these moments lodged deep inside him, not just as memories, but as wounds. Wounds that didn't heal, they hardened. The shift. By the time Ethan turned 16, his father was gone. His mother was a ghost in her own home. And Ethan had learned how to move through life without showing what he felt. His eyes didn't cry anymore, they calculated. The first real thought came late one night, walking past the Miller house. It looked exactly the same as it did 8 years ago, right down to the apple tree. Mr. Miller still liked to shout at kids who came too close. Ethan stopped at the curb and stared at the house. He remembered the humiliation, the laughter, the way it had burned in his chest. And he thought, why is it still standing? Why is he still here? While I've had to carry this weight every single day. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept returning to the same image, the house gone, replaced by charred earth. The first fire, it happened in October. The wind was sharp, the leaves crackled underfoot. Ethan knew the Millers were away. He'd seen them load the car for a weekend trip. He walked up to their porch with a bottle of lighter fluid and a pack of matches. His hands didn't shake. He soaked the front door, then the curtains, visible through the cracked open window. When he lit the match, he didn't drop it immediately. He watched it burn down to his fingers before tossing it inside. The fire spread quickly, dancing across the curtains, climbing the walls. Ethan stepped back, feeling the heat on his face, and for the first time, the weight inside him loosened. No one was hurt, but the Millers lost everything. Ethan thought that would be enough. It wasn't. The next name was Easy Jack Ross. Jack had grown into a smug 20-year-old who still lived in the same house, still walked around like he owned the street. Ethan followed him for weeks, memorizing his patterns. Jack worked late shifts. His house was empty most nights until his parents came home around midnight. One evening, Ethan set the Ross family's garage ablaze. He stood in the alley, watching as flames swallowed Jack's prized motorbike. The fire spread to the main house before the firefighters arrived. Jack's family escaped, coughing and covered in soot. Ethan felt no guilt, only the quiet satisfaction of a debt paid, the escalation. By 17, Ethan had 3 names left on his mental list: Peter Ross, Mrs. Caldwell, and though he rarely admitted it, his own mother. Peter's turn came on a rainy night. Ethan poured gasoline along the side of his apartment building, targeting Peter's unit. The fire drew sirens within minutes. Peter survived, but everything he owned was gone. Mrs. Caldwell was trickier. She lived in a secluded farmhouse. Ethan waited until winter, when snow muffled his footsteps and the cold kept neighbors indoors. The fire lit up the night sky for miles. The next day, local news reported that Mrs. Caldwell had been away visiting her sister. It didn't matter. The house was ash. The last house, his mother's name, had been at the bottom of the list for years. She hadn't hit him or humiliated him like the others. But she'd watched it all happen and done nothing. She'd let the beatings, the ridicule, the years of pain slide by without lifting a finger. The night he decided, she was asleep on the couch, TV still flickering. Ethan walked into the kitchen, grabbed the lighter fluid, and stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. She looked small, older than he remembered. For the first time in years, his hands shook. He thought of the other fires, the cleansing heat, the feeling of justice. But this time, the match in his hand felt heavier. His chest was tight. He lowered the match, staring at her one last time, and walked out into the freezing night. The unraveling, the police caught him 2 weeks later. It wasn't skill that had kept him hidden, it was luck, and luck runs out. Surveillance cameras, half-burned shoe prints, and the fact that arsonists usually burn close to home. When they dragged him into the station, Ethan didn't resist. He sat in the interrogation room, staring at his hands. The detective listed the charges, the possible sentence. When asked why, Ethan only said, "They took pieces of me when I was a kid. I just took them back." Years later, from his cell, Ethan would sometimes think of the fires. Not the heat or the chaos, but the quiet moment afterward, when the world seemed still. People called him a monster. Maybe they were right. But deep down, Ethan knew the truth. He hadn't started with fire. They had lit the first match.